Hello, today we're going to talk about the two main genres that we see in class. Now there's many others and we're going to make more videos on the other ones, but the main ones I want to talk about are nonfiction and fiction. Now I always tell you when you're in my class that the word fiction starts with an F, and we always say that fiction means it's fake. That these stories, somebody made them up. Now some of them might look like they could be real, and we're going to talk about those, but specifically fiction is always fake. And this one has a prefix, non, which means no, so, or not. And the way I use it is, here's the word fiction again, which was over here. This is not fake. So these type of stories, we know that they're real. So if it's not fake, that's the same as saying it is real. Now, when we have, let's talk about a fiction story. Fiction stories, they always have a title, but so do nonfictions. They both have titles. So the first thing that we know is that they have a title, but this one does too. There are things that are the same, things that are a little different. These stories, however, usually is a story. These are stories. This is a story of something or a person. Now, we're going to see some that these could be about a person as well, but these stories could be real, like I said, but not necessarily the story is real. Those are when we start saying that it could be a realistic fiction. But let's look at the things that it makes it up. So we know it's a story. They have a title. These always have characters. Now these are who is the story about, what is happening to that person. It will have a setting as well. Where does the story happen? And I'm going to put here where the story happens. Now this, the setting can actually change. It could, maybe the story could happen at school and then they go home, so then the setting changes. They go home. It will have a problem. Something happens to the character that it becomes a problem. And most of the time, it will get fixed at the end. But there are, and if it gets fixed, it's a resolution. A resolution is how the problem got fixed. Sometimes, some of the problems don't get fixed. We will see that too. But most of the time, it does get fixed. Now, every time somebody writes a story for fiction, we're going to see that the authors have, they write it. Of course, they have to write it for a reason. We need to find out why they write it. So that will be something that we're going to be looking at. And it's called the author's purpose. And we're going to talk about this once we talk about nonfiction. Now, before we go to this, there's a way we can tell some of these things about when it is a fiction story. We know fiction means fake. We know it has a title. We know it's a story about somebody or something, and sometimes an animal. But it has to have characters. These type of stories always have a character. They have a setting, a problem, a solution. And one of the main things I always tell my students is the story itself usually has illustrations. So for example, this one, The Diary of a Worm. We know worms do not do diaries. So if it doesn't do a diary, worms don't hold a pencil like that. We know this is a fake story, but we don't want to use the word fake. We want to use the word fiction. So it has illustrations. We do not use the word pictures, and you'll see why in a minute. It has to have illustrations. And there's usually an illustrator. Sometimes the illustrator is the same as the author. A lot of times it's not. So for example, the author of Diary of a Worm is Doreen Cronin. The pictures are by Harry Bliss, two different people. Now let's look at nonfiction. It has a title, we talked about that. But this is no longer a story. We call this a piece. Like a piece of cake, but this is a piece of information. Now, in this particular one, we don't see characters. It could be about a person, like if you ever read a book about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, those people did exist. So if those people did exist, that means it's a real person. Everybody knows that person. And all the information you're seeing in that book is because you're learning about somebody. So these type of books are about learning about somebody. You can learn about a person, so somebody, about something, or if you ever read a book about how to cook, how to do something. And if you don't like cooking, I'm sure you've read books about how to learn how to play games and pass to some levels. So how to do something, how to do something. So these are very important. In this type of books, nonfiction, we see learning about somebody, learning about something, or learning about how to do something. In these type of books, one of the main things is we have a title, just like the other one, but we also have something called a subtitle. Now, sometimes these books don't have subtitles, but most of the time you will see them. These type of books also have indexes. Well, and I'll show you what they look. I'll put index instead of indexes. It will have a table of contents. It will have glossaries. And it will have something very important. Over here we call them illustrations. Here we're going to call them pictures. And these are pictures taken with cameras. Now, if you talk about George Washington, there are no pictures of George Washington. There was no cameras back then. So in that case, we have a drawing or a painting of him. But most of the time, you will see pictures, and we'll see some. In this type of book, sometimes they have graphs, maps, timelines. Because we're learning about information. Now, in these books, we also have an author's purpose. Why are we reading them? Now, something very important about these books. Let me get one so I can start showing you. I'm going to use this one. This one is from National Geographic Kids. It talks about Mars. If you look at it, I know the front looks a little bit more like they used a computer, but it's actually like a picture of the Mars rover. If I open it to the very beginning, there's my table of contents. It tells me what I can find in every single page. If I want to learn about this one and just learn about the watery past of Mars, I don't have to read it from the beginning. This one says I can go to page 18, and I can go straight to page 18. I do not have to read it in order. So this is a very important. You do not have to read it in order. You do not have to read it in order. Fiction, you have to read in order because you have to go to the beginning of the story and then to the end. So you have to read in order. So very different on those two. But let's go back. Let's see if we can find some information in here. So I look inside and I see lots and lots of pictures taken with cameras. Not illustrations, pictures. Pictures of layers of Mars and how it looks from space. The different machines and space things they've sent to explore it. At the end of the book, I see the index I was talking about. If you're trying to find some information, go back there and look for it so you can go straight to the page you need. The glossary. The glossary is very important because it gives you vocabulary. What information, so I'm going to put it right here. This is for vocabulary. So you're going to learn new words that you didn't use. Maybe these are words specific, in this case, to Mars. We saw pictures already. We saw, I didn't see any maps. Let me see if there's a timeline on this specific book. It even has a quiz at the end, so you can take it. I see checklist in there. This particular one does, oh, here's a timeline. It does not have it like we normally see it, a timeline, but it starts how the first time, like when they started photographing Mars, it started in 1964, and then it has all the way to the last time, 2012, something they did in that year. So this is a specific type of look for the timeline, but it is a timeline. So in this type of book, it looks more like pictures. So these are the things that can help you find out if it's fiction or nonfiction. Now I have a question for you. Look at them. They're very different. On this one that has illustrations, when the author wrote it, it's for your entertainment, to enjoy the story. It is a story. You're going to enjoy it. So this one, the author's purpose of fiction is for enjoyment and entertainment. This one, the one we talked about, Mars, let's use that. Although you might like Mars, you might like space, you like all those things about space, this story, when you read it, you're learning. You're learning about Mars, all the machines they send to Mars. What's the difference between Mars and Earth? So this type of thing, we're learning about something. So this for information and information to learn. And what are we learning? We're learning about somebody, about something, or how to do something. I hope you enjoyed doing this. Now let's take a tiny, tiny little quiz, and we'll talk about them in a second. I have 4 books. I'm going to be showing them. Now I'm going to see if you can tell me what they are. So I have the very first one, National Geographic. It has a title. Here's another title. This is the name of the magazine, Ladders. And this one is called Living on the Plains. Now inside, when I look at it, I do see subtitles. This has illustrations of Native Americans, so think about that. This was from a long time ago, probably when they had no cameras, so use that. At the beginning of it, it has a picture of a prairie dog, so there we see a subtitle. Beginning was about like the plains, but right now in this particular area, I'm going to learn about prairie dogs. If I continue, I do see vocabulary. So far, I wonder what this one's about. I'm going to put it right here. We're going to talk about it. This one is called Sloppy Joe. The author is Dave Keenan. And it's illustrated by Denise Brunkus. So it has an illustrator. Remember what we talked about that. Look at the cover. Do we see a picture or an illustration? Everything inside has illustrations. I don't see an index. I don't see a glossary, not even on the back. I do see, like I said, illustrations. It is a boy. Of course, a boy could exist, but think about it. It has the name of a kid, Sloppy Joe. Could he be a character? This one, it's about a girl. Her name is Shirley Temple, and if you don't know who she is, she did exist. So this is a chapter book. In it, all I see is illustrations. I don't see any pictures. But when I go inside, I do see things about her life. If you want to know what happened when she grew up, it says go to page 29. She does have an author, and because it has pictures, it has an illustrator as well. In the back, it tells me a little more information about the author. So this is one of the books that we're going to talk about. What is it, fiction or nonfiction? And then the last one, another chapter book I took from my library, and this one is Rainbow Magic, and it's a Spanish book actually, but look at it. It has a fairy in the front. Don't worry about the title, don't worry about the illustration, it has an illustrator. But this is all about fairies. What do we know? What do we think about fairies? Could it be nonfiction? Could this be real? Or could it be fiction? So if we go back, I'm going to put them right here, and let's start with the very first one we did. If you guessed this book to be nonfiction, you were right. This is nonfiction. And on the back of it, it has questions, and it has a glossary right there. So this is to learn about the plains. We'll go to Sloppy Joe. That was the second one we did. If you guessed this book to be fiction, you were correct. Joe is the character of this story. And in this story, we also see an illustrator and an illustration. So that tells me that he is, this is for fun, for entertainment. And I never saw a table of content, I never saw a glossary, I never saw any vocabulary or timelines or any of the other things we talked about. Shirley Temple, this was a tricky book. Because she did exist, of course some of you may not know that, but as you start reading it, you can find out information when she was born. How did she get to Hollywood? She became a very famous movie star. So this is a biography, which is a nonfiction. And of course the very last one that I said I chose by accident is a Spanish book. We can tell that the character is illustrated, so that tells me right there that this is a fiction story. It's a fake story. But it does have a story in there for fun. And we know that this is a character. So if you look at it, it's a chapter book and it gives you lots of little chapters throughout it. I hope you enjoyed this book and I hope it was a good way to find out if it's fiction or nonfiction. Bye.